The knocking came in waves, soft at first, then desperate, like small fists fighting against wood and wind and something much worse. I lay still in the darkness of my bedroom, disoriented, my mind sluggish from exhaustion. Another double shift at the hospital had drained me completely. The knock came again, louder now, urgent. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, squinting at the cruel brightness. 4:03 a.m. The knocking turned to pounding. I stumbled to the door, my heart racing with a dread I couldn't name. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but swirling white. The blizzard had gotten worse. Then movement, low to the ground. I yanked the door open. The Arctic wind hit me first, stealing my breath. Then I saw him. Robert. My 12-year-old nephew stood on my doorstep in thin pajamas, covered in snow, his lips blue, his whole body shaking violently. In his arms, he held his sister, Evelyn, 8 years old, unconscious, barely dressed, her small face bone-white against the darkness. My hands moved before my mind fully caught up, clearing the couch, grabbing blankets, checking pulses. Robert's voice cracked as he whispered, "Aunt Dorothy, please, we couldn't get back inside. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't believe what happened next." I lowered Evelyn onto the couch, my fingers pressing against her neck. The pulse was there, faint and slow. Too slow. Her skin felt like frozen porcelain, and her breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps that made my stomach twist. "Robert, sit down. Now." My voice came out steady, clinical, the tone I used when coordinating emergency protocols at the hospital. He obeyed without question, collapsing into the armchair, still trembling so hard I could hear his teeth chattering. I grabbed every blanket I owned from the hallway closet, layering them over Evelyn's small body, tucking them around her carefully. Not too fast, I'd seen enough cases at work to know you couldn't warm hypothermia victims too quickly. The heating pad from my closet went under the blankets, set to low. I pulled off her soaking wet socks, wrapping her feet in dry towels. My phone was already in my hand. 911, what's your emergency? This is Dorothy Jacobs, 447 Maple Street, apartment 2B. I have 2 children, ages 8 and 12, severe hypothermia. The 8-year-old is unconscious, breathing shallow, pulse weak. They were locked outside in the blizzard for an extended period. I kept my voice level, precise. I'm reporting suspected child endangerment. Their parents abandoned them. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but they needed to be said. On record. Official. The dispatcher's voice sharpened. Paramedics are en route. Stay on the line. Are the children breathing? Yes. I'm warming them gradually. The 12-year-old is conscious but severely hypothermic. I moved to Robert while keeping the phone pressed to my ear, wrapping him in the thick comforter from my bed. He looked up at me with eyes that were far too old, far too empty for a child. "Can you drink something warm?" I asked him gently. He nodded, barely. I heated water in the microwave, not too hot, and handed him the mug, guiding his shaking hands around it. He took small, careful sips, and I watched the color slowly begin to return to his lips. The dispatcher kept me on the line, asking questions, confirming details. I answered mechanically, watching Evelyn's chest rise and fall, counting each breath. These were Rebecca's children. My sister's children. Rebecca, who lived in that sprawling estate on the north side with its heated floors and wine cellar and home theater. Rebecca, who posted perfectly curated photos of family ski trips and charity galas. Rebecca, who hadn't called me in 6 months. And Nathan. Her husband. Old money, new arrogance. They'd left these children outside to freeze. Robert's voice pulled me back. "We were just playing in the snow," he said quietly, staring into the mug. "After dinner. It wasn't even that late. Maybe 7 o'clock. When we tried to come back in, the door wouldn't open. The code didn't work." "Where were your parents?" "They left for some event. A gala, I think. Mom was wearing the silver dress." His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a script. We knocked. We rang the doorbell. Nobody came. The sirens were getting closer now, their wail cutting through the howling wind. How long were you out there, Robert? He took another sip of water. I don't know. Hours. Evie started crying, then she stopped talking. She got really sleepy. I gave her my jacket, but... His voice cracked. I didn't know where else to go. I remembered you lived close. Close. A mile and a half through a blizzard. In pajamas. Carrying his sister. The paramedics were pounding on my door now, and I let them in, stepping back as they swarmed around Evelyn with their equipment and their efficiency. I gave them the details, timeline, symptoms, what I'd done. One of them looked at me and nodded, a silent acknowledgement that I'd probably saved her life. A police officer appeared in my doorway, notebook in hand. And as I began to tell him everything, I realized with absolute clarity that this night had just changed everything. There was no going back now. Not for me. Not for these children. Not for Rebecca. The paramedics worked over Evelyn with practiced efficiency, their voices low and urgent as they checked vitals and prepared her for transport. I stood back, giving them space, but my eyes never left her small form on my couch. Robert sat beside me now, wrapped in the comforter, the mug of warm water clutched between his hands like a lifeline. The police officer, Officer Martinez, according to his badge, had stepped into the kitchen to radio for backup. Through the doorway, I could hear him reporting the situation in clipped, professional tones. Child endangerment. Possible neglect. CPS notification required. I looked down at Robert. In the lamplight, I could see the full extent of what the night had done to him. His pajamas were soaked through, clinging to his thin frame. His feet were bare except for the dry socks I'd pulled onto them, and I could see the angry red marks where frostbite had started to take hold. But it was his eyes that made my chest ache, empty and distant, like he'd gone somewhere far away to survive this. Robert, I said softly, sitting down beside him. Can you tell me what happened? From the beginning? He took a slow sip of water, staring straight ahead. When he spoke, his voice was eerily calm, mechanical, like he was reciting facts for a school report. Mom and Dad left at 6 o'clock. Maybe a little before. There was a charity gala at the Riverside Hotel. Mom spent all afternoon getting ready, hair, makeup, the silver dress with the crystals on it. Dad was on his phone the whole time, talking about donations and networking. He paused, tilting his head slightly. They told us there were leftovers in the fridge. Told us to be in bed by 9. I wanted to interrupt, to ask why they'd left 2 children alone on a night when a blizzard warning had been in effect since noon. But I kept quiet, letting him talk. Evie wanted to play in the snow. It was coming down really hard, and she'd been stuck inside all day. I told her we could go out for just a little while, maybe build a snowman in the backyard. His grip on the mug tightened. We went out through the back door. The motion sensor light was on, so we could see. We were only out there for maybe 20 minutes. Evie made snow angels. The image hit me hard, 2 children playing in the snow while their parents sipped champagne at a gala across town. When we tried to come back in, the door wouldn't open. The smart lock, it has this code panel. I punched in the numbers like always, but it just kept flashing red. Error. I tried it 5 times, maybe 10 times. Nothing. His voice remained flat, emotionless. I thought maybe the system glitched because of the cold. So we went around to the front door. Same thing. The code didn't work. Did you have a key? He shook his head. Mom and Dad don't believe in keys. Everything's automated. Keypads, fingerprint scanners, phone apps. They always say it's more secure. The irony in that statement hung in the air between us. I tried calling Dad's cell. It went straight to voicemail. Mom's too. I called 4 times. Of course they didn't answer. They were too busy being seen, being important. What did you do then? We rang the doorbell. We knocked. We banged on the windows. For the first time, a crack appeared in his carefully controlled voice. Evie started crying. She said she was cold. I gave her my jacket and we huddled by the front door, under the portico, but the wind just kept coming. The snow was getting worse. I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. He didn't pull away, but he didn't lean into the touch either. He just sat there, rigid, telling his story. After a while, Evie stopped crying. She got really quiet. She said she was tired, that she wanted to sleep. I knew that was bad. I'd read about hypothermia in health class last year. You're not supposed to fall asleep. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I tried to keep her awake. I sang songs, told her stories, made her do jumping jacks with me. But she just kept getting sleepier and sleepier. The paramedics were loading Evelyn onto a stretcher now, securing blankets around her. One of them caught my eye and gestured toward the door. Time to go. How did you end up here, Robert? I remembered you lived close. Mom mentioned it once, said you were in some apartment complex off Maple Street. I picked Evie up and started walking. I didn't know which building, so I just kept going until I saw a mailbox with your name on it. He finally looked at me, and the emptiness in his eyes was replaced by something raw and desperate. I carried her through the woods because it was faster than the road. She's so little, but my arms kept giving out. I had to stop and rest, and every time I did, I was scared she wouldn't wake up. A 12-year-old boy. 1.5 miles. Through a blizzard. Carrying his unconscious sister. You saved her life, I said, and my voice cracked despite my best efforts to stay composed. Robert, do you understand that? You saved Evelyn's life. He looked away, back down at the mug in his hands. I just want her to be okay. Officer Martinez appeared in the doorway. We need to get the boy checked out too. The ambulance is ready. I nodded and stood, helping Robert to his feet. He swayed slightly, exhaustion finally catching up to him now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I kept my hand on his shoulder, steadying him. As we walked toward the door, he stopped and looked back at my small apartment, at the messy couch, the scattered blankets, the evidence of the chaos we'd just lived through. Thank you, Aunt Dorothy, he said quietly. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. Whatever it took, whatever I had to do, these children were never going back to that house. Never. The hospital emergency room was controlled chaos, the kind I'd seen 1,000 times from the administrative side but never from this angle, never as the person sitting in the cramped waiting area with a blanket-wrapped child beside me. Robert had been examined and cleared by the ER doctor, given heated 4 fluids and a clean bill of health that felt miraculous considering what he'd been through. Evelyn was still being monitored upstairs, her body temperature slowly climbing back toward normal, but the doctors said she'd make it. She'd make it because her brother had refused to let her die. I sat with Robert in a private consultation room now, waiting. A nurse had brought him hot chocolate and a hospital sandwich, which he picked at without enthusiasm. The clock on the wall read 7:42 a.m. Less than 4 hours since he'd knocked on my door. It felt like a lifetime. The door opened, and a woman in her mid-40s entered, carrying a tablet and a worn leather messenger bag. She had kind eyes but a mouth set in a firm line that told me she'd seen too much, dealt with too many broken systems and broken families. Ms. Jacobs? I'm Linda Martinez, Child Protective Services. She extended her hand, and I shook it, feeling the weight of what was coming. I need to speak with you privately for a moment. Is there somewhere Robert can wait comfortably? A nurse materialized as if summoned, gently guiding Robert to a nearby family lounge with a television and a promise of more hot chocolate. He went without protest, too exhausted to question anything anymore. Linda closed the door and sat down across from me, her expression professional but not unkind. I've read the police report and spoken with the responding officers. I've also reviewed the medical assessments for both children. she paused, choosing her words carefully. Ms. Jacobs, what happened last night constitutes severe child endangerment. The parents left 2 minor children unsupervised during a blizzard warning, and those children were locked out of their home for approximately 6 hours in sub-zero temperatures. We're looking at criminal charges. I nodded, my throat tight. Good. Linda's eyebrows rose slightly. The children's parents are your sister and brother-in-law, correct? Yes. Rebecca and Nathan Brown. And you're willing to make a formal statement supporting criminal prosecution? Absolutely. The word came out harder than I intended. She made a note on her tablet, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The children cannot go back to that home. Not tonight, not until a full investigation is completed and the home environment is deemed safe. Which means I need to place them somewhere immediately. My heart started pounding. I'll take them. They can stay with me. I was hoping you'd say that. Linda set down her tablet. But there's a process, Ms. Jacobs. I need to conduct a home study to ensure your residence meets minimum safety requirements for 2 children. And I need to do it within 24 hours, or the children will be placed in emergency foster care. The words hit me like cold water. 24 hours. I have a 1-bedroom apartment, I said slowly, reality crashing down around me. About 650 square feet. I have a couch, a coffee table, and a bed. I work 60-hour weeks at County General as a hospital administrator. Linda's expression softened, but her voice remained firm. Then you have less than 24 hours to change that situation. The children need separate sleeping arrangements. Robert needs his own space, appropriate for a 12-year-old boy. You'll need to demonstrate adequate food, clothing, and basic necessities. I'll need references, a background check, proof of income and employment. And the space needs to be clean, safe, and suitable for children. I felt the walls of the consultation room closing in. My apartment was a efficiency unit I'd rented 3 years ago when I took the administrator position, a place to sleep between shifts, nothing more. I had a futon couch, a bed, a dresser, and a kitchen table I used as a desk. I didn't even have a television. I don't have a second bedroom, I said quietly. Then you need to create one. A room divider, a converted office space, even a well-organized corner with privacy screening. I can work with that if it meets basic requirements. But Robert cannot sleep on your couch indefinitely, Ms. Jacobs. These children have been through trauma. They need stability, structure, and their own safe spaces. I thought about my home office, the tiny alcove off the living room where I kept my filing cabinet and laptop. It was barely 6 feet by 8 feet. But it had a window. I can make it work, I said, though I had no idea how. Linda pulled a business card from her bag and handed it to me. I'll be at your address tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp to conduct the home study. If you pass, I can grant you temporary emergency custody pending the investigation and court proceedings. If you don't. She let the sentence hang in the air. If I don't? Then Robert and Evelyn go into the foster system. Separately, most likely. It's nearly impossible to place sibling groups on emergency placement, especially when one requires medical monitoring. Separately. The word made me sick. I also need you to understand what you're taking on here, Linda continued, her voice gentle but unyielding. This won't be temporary. Based on what I've seen in the initial reports, your sister and brother-in-law are facing serious criminal charges. Even if they avoid prison time, regaining custody will be a long, difficult legal battle. You're not just babysitting for a few days, Ms. Jacobs. You're potentially becoming a guardian. Maybe permanently. I looked through the window in the door at Robert, sitting alone in the lounge, staring at a television he wasn't watching. A boy who'd walked through a blizzard carrying his sister because the people who were supposed to protect them had abandoned them. I understand, I said. Linda stood, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Then you have work to do. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9. Don't be late. She left, and I sat alone in the consultation room, staring at her business card. 24 hours. 1-bedroom apartment. 2 traumatized children. And a sister who would fight me with every resource her money could buy. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. My savings account showed $3,847.52. My checking account had $1,206.38. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. But it would have to be. I left the hospital at 8:15 a.m. with a list that felt impossible and a timeline that felt cruel. Robert was staying with Evelyn in her hospital room. A nurse had set up a cot for him, and he'd fallen asleep almost instantly, his small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. I'd kissed his forehead before I left, a gesture that felt both natural and terrifying in its intimacy. The first stop was my apartment. I stood in the doorway, seeing it with new eyes, the cramped efficiency of a woman who lived at work and only came home to sleep. The futon couch with its worn cushions. The kitchen table buried under hospital paperwork. The alcove that served as my home office, currently occupied by a filing cabinet, a folding chair, and boxes of old tax returns. 24 hours to turn this into a home for 2 children. I pulled out my phone and started searching. Family law attorney near me. The first few results were consultation fees I couldn't afford. Then I found her, attorney Sarah Brennan. 5-star reviews. Specializes in emergency custody and child welfare cases. Her retainer was listed at $7,500. I had just over $5,000. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number. A receptionist answered, professional and brisk, and I explained the situation in clipped sentences. Children nearly died, parents arrested, CPS home study in 24 hours, needed representation immediately. Hold please. 2 minutes later, a woman's voice came on the line. This is Sarah Brennan. Tell me everything. I did. The whole story spilled out, the knock at 4 a.m., the hypothermia, Robert carrying Evelyn through the woods, the smart lock that mysteriously stopped working, my sister's mansion and designer dresses and criminal charges pending. When I finished, there was a long silence. I'll take the case, Attorney Brennan said. But I need to be honest with you, Ms. Jacobs. Your sister and brother-in-law will have resources. They'll hire the best lawyers money can buy, and they'll paint you as the villain. This will be expensive and ugly. How expensive? My retainer is $7,500. That covers initial filings, the emergency custody hearing, and preliminary negotiations. If this goes to trial, we're looking at another $10,000 to $15,000 minimum. My stomach dropped. I can't afford that. How much do you have? About $5,000. Another pause. Bring me $5,000 by noon today, and I'll start the paperwork. We'll figure out the rest as we go. But Ms. Jacobs? You're going to need more. Much more. I thanked her and hung up, then stood in my apartment, doing calculations in my head. $5,000 by noon. It was 8:37 a.m. The first box I pulled from my closet held my mother's jewelry. She'd died 2 years ago, leaving me the small collection she'd inherited from her own mother, antique pieces, nothing extravagant, but real gold and genuine stones. A cameo brooch. A strand of pearls. A pair of emerald earrings she'd worn to my college graduation. I held the earrings up to the morning light, remembering her smile that day, her pride. Then I put them in my purse. The pawn shop on 5th Street opened at 9. The man behind the counter was kinder than I expected, examining each piece carefully, explaining the appraisals. The pearls were worth more than I thought. The emerald earrings were Victorian, rare. I can give you $2,800 for the lot, he said. It wasn't enough. But it was a start. My tablet came next, the expensive one I'd bought myself 3 months ago as a reward for making senior administrator. I'd barely used it. The electronics store offered me $350, and I took it without negotiating. That brought me to $3,150. I needed $1,850 more. The credit union loan officer listened to my request with a sympathetic expression that told me exactly what she thought of my chances. Ms. Jacobs, with your current debt-to-income ratio, I can approve you for a personal loan of up to $2,000 at 18% interest. 18%. It was predatory. It was necessary. I'll take it. By 11:47 a.m., I walked into Attorney Brennan's office with a cashier's check for $5,000 and a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. She took it, handed me a retainer agreement, and immediately began making calls. I'm filing for emergency temporary custody today, she said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. I'll also request a restraining order preventing the parents from contacting the children until the criminal case is resolved. Now go home and get that apartment ready. If you failed at home study, none of this matters. I drove home in a daze. I had 6 hours until the furniture store closed. 4 hours until Target shut its doors. The home office transformation happened in a blur. I dismantled the filing cabinet, hauling it to the building storage unit. The boxes of paperwork went into my car trunk. I measured the alcove, 6 feet by 8 feet, barely enough for a twin bed, and drove to the discount furniture warehouse on the edge of town. A twin bed frame with storage drawers underneath, $189. A mattress, $220. Bedding in blues and grays that seemed appropriate for a 12-year-old boy, $67. A small desk and chair, $95. A lamp, $22. A curtain rod and blackout curtains to give him privacy, $43. Target was next. Towels, toiletries, a shower curtain with sea creatures for Evelyn. Food, real food, not the frozen dinners I survived on. Cereal, milk, bread, peanut butter, fresh fruit, chicken breasts I had no idea how to cook. Cleaning supplies to make the apartment spotless. By 6 p.m., I was assembling furniture in the alcove-turned bedroom, my hands blistered from the screwdriver, my back aching. The bed frame went together slowly, complicated by missing screws and my own exhaustion. The desk followed, wobbly but functional. I hung the curtains, creating a wall of fabric that transformed the alcove into something private, something that could almost be called a room. I made the bed with the new sheets, fluffed the pillow, set a small reading lamp on the desk. It wasn't much. It was everything I had. The rest of the apartment received the same desperate attention. I scrubbed the bathroom until the tiles gleamed. Organized the kitchen cabinets, stocking them with food a child might actually eat. Set up the futon as Evelyn's temporary bed, with soft blankets and the stuffed elephant I'd panic bought at Target. At 2 a.m., I collapsed on my own bed, fully clothed, too exhausted to even shower. Linda Martinez would be here in 7 hours. I'd spent everything. Done everything. It had to be enough. Linda Martinez arrived at exactly 9 a.m., clipboard in hand, her expression professionally neutral. She walked through my apartment with meticulous attention, checking smoke detectors, inspecting the makeshift bedroom, examining the stocked refrigerator. She asked questions about my work schedule, my support system, my understanding of childhood trauma. I answered everything honestly, my heart pounding with each notation she made on her forms. After 45 minutes, she looked up at me. You pass. I'll file the temporary emergency custody order this afternoon. The relief nearly knocked me sideways. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Ms. Jacobs. This is just the beginning. She handed me a stack of paperwork. The children can be discharged this afternoon. I'll be in touch about the next steps. By noon, I was back at the hospital with clothes I'd bought for Robert and Evelyn, jeans, sweaters, sneakers, everything still creased from the packaging. Evelyn was awake now, her color better, though she still looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. Robert sat beside her, holding her hand, and when he saw me, something in his expression shifted. Not quite hope, but maybe the beginning of it. We're going home, I told them, and the word felt both right and terrifying. My home. You're staying with me. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. What about mom and dad? I didn't have a good answer for that. I was saved from trying by the sound of sharp footsteps in the hallway outside, accompanied by raised voices. The door burst open. Rebecca stood in the doorway, and for a moment, I didn't recognize my own sister. She looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover, designer pantsuit in cream wool, her dark hair blown out in perfect waves, makeup flawless despite the early hour. Behind her, Nathan loomed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, his expression thunderous. But it was the smell that hit me first. Expensive perfume, cloying and overwhelming, mixed with something else. Alcohol, barely masked by breath mints. What the hell do you think you're doing? Rebecca's voice was ice, her eyes blazing as she stared at me. Those are my children. Robert's hand tightened around Evelyn's. I stepped between them and my sister, blocking her view of the bed. Rebecca. Nathan. I kept my voice steady, clinical. The children are in CPS custody. You shouldn't be here. We have every right to be here. Nathan pushed past Rebecca, moving into the room with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never being told no. We're their parents. And you, he pointed at me, his finger jabbing the air. You had no right to make that report. No right to involve the police. I had every right. They nearly died. It was an accident. Rebecca's voice cracked, desperation bleeding through the anger. The smart lock malfunctioned. We didn't know. You left them alone during a blizzard warning, I said, my voice hardening. You went to a gala and didn't answer your phones. Robert carried Evelyn a mile and a half through the woods because you weren't there. Nathan's jaw clenched. We're taking them home. Right now. No, you're not. He took a step closer to me, and I could smell the whiskey on his breath now, sharp beneath the mints. Listen to me very carefully, Dorothy. You're going to go to the police and clarify your statement. You're going to tell them it was all a misunderstanding, that you overreacted, that the children were never in any real danger. I stared at him. I'm not doing that. Yes, you are. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook, flipping it open with practiced ease. How much? 10,000? 20? Name your price. I'll write you a check right now. The audacity of it stunned me into momentary silence. He actually thought he could buy me. Buy his way out of what he'd done. Put that away, I said quietly. 30,000. He was already writing, the pen scratching across the paper. $30,000, and you go to the police today. You tell them you made a mistake. This all goes away. No. His head snapped up, and for the first time I saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. You don't understand what you're dealing with. We have lawyers. Resources. We can bury you in legal fees until you have nothing left. Or, he held out the check. You can take this and walk away. Be smart, Dorothy. Get out. Nathan's expression darkened. He crumpled the check in his fist and stepped forward, closing the distance between us. His hand shot out and grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. You're making a very big mistake, he hissed. Let go of her. Robert's voice cut through the room, sharp and loud. He was standing now, shaking but defiant, his small body positioned between the bed and his father. Let go of her right now. Robert, sit down, Nathan ordered, his voice cold. No. You left us. You locked us out and you left us. Robert's voice broke, years of suppressed pain pouring out in a flood. Evie almost died. I had to carry her through the snow because you weren't there, because you're never there. That's enough. I hate you. The words ripped out of Robert like a physical thing. I hate you and I hate Mom and I never want to see you again. Nathan's grip on my arm tightened, and something snapped inside me. I yanked my arm free and shoved him backward, hard. He stumbled, shock replacing anger on his face. Security. I shouted toward the hallway. Security, now. Footsteps pounded toward us. 2 hospital security guards appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene, Nathan's aggressive posture, Rebecca's tears, Robert's protective stance, my arm already beginning to bruise. "These people need to leave," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "They physically assaulted me and they're violating a CPS order." One of the guards stepped forward. "Sir, ma'am, you need to come with us." "Do you know who I am?" Nathan's voice rose. "Do you have any idea?" "Sir, we can do this the easy way or the hard way." By the time the police arrived 10 minutes later, Nathan was still arguing, still threatening, still convinced his money and status would protect him. Rebecca stood beside him, mascara streaking down her perfect face, alternating between begging and accusing. The officers didn't care about designer suits or charitable donations or social connections. They cared about the medical report documenting hypothermia, the police report documenting child endangerment, and the fresh bruise blooming on my arm where Nathan had grabbed me. "Nathan and Rebecca Brown, you're under arrest for assault and child endangerment," the lead officer said, producing handcuffs. I watched my sister's face crumble as the metal clicked around her wrists. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy. The larger part remembered Robert's empty eyes, Evelyn's unconscious body, the desperate knocking at 4 a.m. As they were led away, Rebecca looked back at me one last time. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice venomous. "I'll make sure you regret this." The door closed behind them, and the room fell silent. Robert sank back onto the chair beside Evelyn's bed, his entire body trembling. I sat down beside him, my own hands shaking, and put my arm around his shoulders. This time, he leaned into me. "It's over," I whispered. But we both knew it wasn't. Not even close. Linda Martinez called me 3 days later while I was trying to help Evelyn with a coloring book at my kitchen table. The little girl had barely spoken since coming home from the hospital, communicating mostly in nods and head shakes, her eyes too watchful for a child her age. Robert sat on the futon doing homework with an intensity that felt more like escape than diligence. "We finished the home inspection," Linda said without preamble. "You need to hear this." I moved into my bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. "How bad is it?" "Worse than we thought." I heard papers rustling on her end. The Brown estate is a 14,000 square foot property with 6 bedrooms, indoor pool, home theater, wine cellar. Beautiful on the surface. But Ms. Jacobs, these children were living in squalor wrapped in luxury. My stomach tightened. "Tell me." "The kitchen first." The refrigerator had moldy takeout containers dating back weeks. Expired milk. Rotting produce. The pantry was stocked with expensive imported goods, truffle oil, aged balsamic vinegar, artisanal crackers, but nothing a child could actually prepare for themselves. We found 3 boxes of stale cereal and 1 jar of peanut butter. That's it. I thought of Robert heating up leftovers, trying to feed himself and his sister while his parents attended another gala. "The children's bedrooms tell the story better," Linda continued. "Evelyn's room looks like a toy store exploded. Hundreds of dolls still in their original packaging, board games with the shrink wrap intact, an American Girl collection worth thousands that's never been touched. Robert's room is the same, gaming systems still in boxes, sports equipment with the tags on, a telescope that's never been assembled. These parents were buying affection, Ms. Jacobs. Expensive gifts to assuage their guilt, but no actual presents. What about the security footage? That's where it gets damning. The home system archives 90 days of footage. We reviewed all of it." Her voice grew harder. "Nathan and Rebecca Brown left those children alone an average of 4 nights per week. Business dinners, charity events, weekend getaways. Sometimes they'd be gone overnight without arranging childcare. Robert was essentially raising Evelyn himself." I pressed my hand against the wall, steadying myself. "They left them alone overnight?" "Robert's 12. Multiple times. We have footage of the parents leaving at 6 p.m. and not returning until the following afternoon. The children were responsible for putting themselves to bed, getting themselves breakfast, everything. On the night of the incident, the footage shows Nathan and Rebecca leaving at 5:47 p.m. They didn't return until we notified them at the hospital 36 hours later. 36 hours. They'd been at the hospital for questioning, released on bail, and gone straight back to whatever life they'd been living while their children fought for survival. "There's more," Linda said. "We found Robert's journal in his bedroom. 3 years' worth of entries. Ms. Jacobs, this child has been documenting his own neglect since he was 9 years old." "What does it say?" "May 12, 2 years ago, Mom and Dad went to New York for the weekend. Left money for pizza. Evie cried because she wanted Mom to tuck her in. I read her 3 stories instead. June 3, last year, Dad yelled at me for asking if they could skip the fundraiser and stay home. He said I was being selfish and ungrateful. September 18, 3 months ago, Evie asked me if Mom and Dad love us. I didn't know what to say. My eyes burned. I blinked hard, forcing the tears back. The most recent entry is from the day before the incident," Linda continued, her voice gentler now. "It says, another party. They're getting dressed up again. I don't think they even remember it's my birthday tomorrow." The words hit like a physical blow. His birthday? January 14. The night they were locked out was the night before Robert's 13th birthday. They forgot. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, the phone pressed to my ear. Robert had carried his sister through a blizzard on what should have been his birthday celebration. "We also interviewed the neighbors," Linda said. "The family next door, the Hendersons, they had plenty to say. Mrs. Henderson testified that Robert came to their door at least twice a month asking if they had any food to spare. She thought the family was having financial trouble. She had no idea the parents were millionaires who just couldn't be bothered to keep groceries in the house." "Did she ever report it?" "She gave him food. She thought she was being helpful." Linda sighed. "People see what they want to see, Ms. Jacobs. A big house, expensive cars, well-dressed parents. They don't look closer. What happens now?" "I'm filing my official report with the court today. The Brown estate is being declared unsuitable and unsafe for minor children. Combined with the criminal charges, child endangerment, assault, and now this evidence of chronic neglect, the prosecution has a strong case. Your sister and brother-in-law are looking at serious prison time." "And the children?" "They stay with you. Temporary custody will likely become permanent, pending the outcome of the criminal trial. Ms. Jacobs, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get uglier before it gets better. Nathan and Rebecca Brown have already hired a top legal team. They're going to fight this with everything they have." I thought about Rebecca's final words as she was led away in handcuffs. "You'll regret this." "Let them fight," I said quietly. "I'm not giving these children back." "Good. Because they need you." Linda paused. "One more thing. We found the smart lock logs. Nathan changed the access code remotely at 7:23 p.m. the night of the incident. 40 minutes after the children tried to come inside. The room tilted. He locked them out on purpose? The system shows he accessed the app from his phone and changed the 6-digit code to something the children wouldn't know. When Robert tried the old code, it failed. Nathan essentially weaponized his own home security system to punish his children for playing in the snow. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a malfunction. It was deliberate. "That's attempted murder," I said, my voice hollow. "That's what the prosecutor is calling it. The evidence is irrefutable, Ms. Jacobs. Server logs, timestamps, everything. Nathan Brown deliberately locked his children outside in sub-zero temperatures during a blizzard warning." I ended the call and sat on my bedroom floor, staring at nothing. Through the door, I could hear Evelyn's small voice asking Robert a question, could hear his patient response. 2 children who'd been abandoned, neglected, and nearly killed by the people who were supposed to love them most. I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door. They looked up at me, both of them, their faces reflecting a fear I was determined to replace with safety. "Who wants to help me make dinner?" I asked, forcing warmth into my voice. For the first time since coming home, Evelyn smiled. It was a start. The first video appeared on Rebecca's social media 3 weeks after her arrest. I didn't see it initially. I was too busy navigating the chaos of sudden parenthood, learning how to braid Evelyn's hair and help Robert with algebra homework while working full-time. It was my colleague, Marcus, who showed me his phone during our lunch break, his expression grim. "Dorothy, you need to see this." Rebecca sat in what looked like a hotel suite, perfectly lit, her makeup flawless. She wore a soft cream sweater and delicate gold jewelry, her hair falling in gentle waves. She looked like a victim. "I want to talk about what happened to my family," she began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "About how my children were stolen from me by a jealous, bitter woman who has resented me her entire life." My coffee turned to ash in my mouth. My sister Dorothy has always envied what I have. The life I built, the family I created, the success my husband and I achieved through hard work and dedication. When a tragic accident happened, a smart lock malfunctioned during a terrible storm, she saw her opportunity. She weaponized a terrible situation to manipulate Child Protective Services, to lie to the police, to paint me and my husband as monsters. The video had been viewed 43,000 times. The comments were vicious. "She's clearly innocent. The sister is disgusting. Those poor parents. This is what happens when bitter single women get jealous." There were 3 more videos, each one more polished, more devastating. Rebecca crying as she talked about missing her babies. Rebecca showing photos of the children's bedrooms with their expensive toys. Rebecca reading a prepared statement about how she and Nathan were fighting to bring their children home from their kidnapper. She never mentioned the hypothermia. Never mentioned Robert carrying Evelyn through the woods. Never mentioned the deliberately changed door code or the journal entries or the chronic neglect documented by CPS. She just cried beautifully for the camera and let the internet do the rest. My phone started ringing that afternoon. Unknown numbers, blocked calls, people wanting statements or interviews or simply to scream at me. Robert came home from school pale and shaking because a classmate had shown him the videos, had asked if it was true that I'd kidnapped him. "It's not true," I told him, holding his hands across the kitchen table. "You know what really happened." "I know," he whispered. "But everyone believes her." By the next morning, Attorney Brennan was in my office at County General, along with the hospital's legal counsel and the chief of staff. I expected a conversation about keeping my personal life separate from work. Instead, they surprised me. "We're standing behind you," the chief of staff said firmly. "We've reviewed the police reports, the CPS findings, and the medical documentation. What happened to those children was criminal negligence, and we will not let your sister's defamation campaign stand unchallenged." The hospital's legal team filed a countersuit within 48 hours, defamation, libel, intentional infliction of emotional distress. They held a press conference where my chief of staff read a statement detailing the medical evidence of severe hypothermia and the documented neglect. It didn't stop the videos, but it slowed them. Then, for days later, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You need to see this." I almost deleted it. Instead, I opened it. "Ms. Jacobs, I was at the Riverside Hotel Gala the night your niece and nephew were locked out. I've been following the news coverage, and I can't stay silent anymore. What your sister is saying publicly doesn't match what I witnessed that night. I'm sending you screenshots of text messages I saw. I think they'll help your case. I'm remaining anonymous because the Browns are powerful people, but please use this information. Those children deserve better." Attached were 3 screenshots, crisp and clear. The first was a text from Nathan to Rebecca, timestamped 7:23 p.m., "Just changed the door code remotely. Maybe a few hours in the cold will teach Robert not to go outside without asking permission. He needs to learn consequences." Rebecca's response, "Don't you think that's a bit harsh?" It's freezing out there. Nathan's reply, they'll come knocking soon enough. They'll be fine. This is called parenting. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. This wasn't the security system log Linda had mentioned. This was intent, stated explicitly. Nathan had deliberately locked his children out as punishment, and Rebecca had known about it. The second screenshot was from 2 hours later, 9:34 p.m. Rebecca to Nathan, should we go check on them? They haven't come back inside yet. Nathan, they're probably already asleep. Stop worrying. We'll deal with it in the morning. The third screenshot was timestamped 11:47 p.m. Rebecca, I'm getting worried. Should I call someone? Nathan, and admit we locked them out? Don't be stupid. They're fine. Stop texting me about this. I forwarded the email to Attorney Brennan immediately, my fingers barely able to hit the right keys. She called me 3 minutes later. This is it, she said, her voice vibrating with intensity. This is everything we need. These text messages prove premeditation, prove Rebecca's knowledge, prove they chose the gala over their children's safety even when they suspected something was wrong. With the security system logs and these messages, the prosecutor can upgrade the charges. To what? Attempted murder. Reckless endangerment of a child with intent. This isn't neglect anymore, Dorothy. This is a deliberate act that nearly killed 2 children. The next morning, Rebecca posted another video. This time, she sat beside Nathan, both of them looking somber and united. They talked about their legal team's confidence, about the truth coming to light, about being reunited with their children soon. The video was live when the police arrived at their hotel suite. I didn't see it happen in real time, but Attorney Brennan sent me the news link an hour later. The live stream had captured everything: the knock on the door, Rebecca's confused expression, the officers explaining they were being arrested for violation of bail conditions and additional charges of attempted murder. The stream had ended abruptly with Rebecca screaming and Nathan shouting about lawyers. It had been viewed 1.2 million times. That evening, I sat with Robert and Evelyn on the futon, the television off, the apartment quiet except for the sound of their breathing. Are they gone? Evelyn asked softly. Really gone? I looked at Robert. He met my eyes, and I saw something I hadn't seen before, not quite peace, but maybe the beginning of it. Yes, I said. They're really gone. Evelyn curled into my side, her small body finally relaxing. Robert sat on my other side, and when I put my arm around his shoulders, he didn't pull away. Outside, the city moved on, but inside this small apartment, 3 people who'd been strangers a month ago began to feel like family. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was safe. And for now, that was everything. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, the wood paneling dark and oppressive under harsh fluorescent lights. I sat in the gallery behind Attorney Brennan, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. Robert and Evelyn were at school, protected from this final confrontation, though Robert had asked me 3 times that morning if I was sure he couldn't come. I want to see them lose, he'd said, his voice hard with an anger that broke my heart. Nathan and Rebecca sat at the defense table flanked by their legal team, 3 attorneys in expensive suits who radiated the kind of confidence that came from winning cases for people who could afford to make problems disappear. Nathan wore a navy suit and power tie, projecting executive authority. Rebecca had chosen a modest dress in pale blue, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup. The devoted mother, wrongly accused. But I could see the cracks. Nathan's jaw was clenched too tight. Rebecca's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. Judge Patricia Morrison entered, and we all rose. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair and the expression of someone who'd seen every manipulation, every lie, every parent who prioritized image over their children's welfare. Be seated, she said, her voice carrying absolute authority. We're here for the emergency hearing regarding the criminal charges against Nathan and Rebecca Brown, as well as the petition for permanent termination of parental rights. Attorney Brennan, you may proceed. Sarah Brennan stood, commanding the room despite being half the size of the defense team. She'd told me before we entered that this hearing would be decisive. Either we won everything today, or we'd be fighting for years. Your Honor, the evidence against the defendants is overwhelming and irrefutable. I'll begin with the security system server logs. She pulled up a document on the court's display screen. At 7:23 p.m. on January 13, Nathan Brown remotely accessed his home security system and changed the 6-digit entry code, effectively locking his 12-year-old son and 8-year-old daughter outside during a blizzard warning with temperatures at 7 degrees Fahrenheit. The defense attorney started to rise. Your Honor, my clients maintain that was an accidental. I'm not finished, Brennan said sharply. She pulled up the text message screenshots. These messages, provided by a witness at the gala the defendants attended that evening, show explicit intent. Mr. Brown stated, and I quote, "Maybe a few hours in the cold will teach Robert not to go outside without asking permission. He needs to learn consequences." The courtroom fell silent. Even the defense attorneys had stopped shuffling papers. Furthermore, Brennan continued, when Mrs. Brown expressed concern at 9:34 p.m. and again at 11:47 p.m., Mr. Brown dismissed her worries and explicitly told her not to call for help. The defendants attended their gala, returned to their hotel suite, and did not check on their children until police notification 36 hours later. By then, the children had suffered severe hypothermia, and the 8-year-old was unconscious and barely breathing. Judge Morrison's expression grew colder with each word. She turned to the defense table. Counselor, I'm willing to hear your response. The lead defense attorney stood, smoothing his tie. Your Honor, my clients made a terrible error in judgment, but this was not intentional harm. Mr. Brown changed the code thinking the children were already inside. When he realized his mistake. When did he realize his mistake? The judge interrupted. A pause. After the incident. After his daughter was hospitalized for hypothermia? After his son had to carry her 1.5 miles through a forest in a blizzard? Judge Morrison's voice cut like glass. Continue. The attorney floundered. The Browns are pillars of the community. They've donated millions to charity. They have no prior criminal record. They love their children and want nothing more than to be reunited. Attorney Brennan, the judge said, cutting him off. You mentioned a bail violation? Yes, Your Honor. Despite explicit bail conditions prohibiting contact with the victims or public statements about the case, Mrs. Brown produced and published multiple social media videos defaming my client, Dorothy Jacobs, and spreading false narratives about the incident. One of these videos was being recorded when officers arrived to arrest her for bail violation. Judge Morrison turned to Rebecca. Mrs. Brown, did you post videos on social media while out on bail? Rebecca stood, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. Your Honor, I was simply trying to tell my side of the story. I have a right to. You have a right to remain silent, which you should have exercised. The judge's tone was arctic. You violated your bail conditions, slandered a woman who saved your children's lives, and showed a stunning lack of judgment and remorse. She turned to Nathan. Mr. Brown, do you have anything to say? Nathan stood, his composure finally cracking. Those are my children, Your Honor. I made a mistake, but they belong with their parents, not with the woman who kept them from freezing to death? Judge Morrison's voice rose. With the woman who took them in with less than 24 hours' notice, who sacrificed her savings, her possessions, and her privacy to give them a safe home. That's who you think is unsuitable? Nathan's mouth opened and closed. The judge pulled a document toward her, reading quickly. I've reviewed the CPS report. Chronic neglect. Absent parents. A child's journal documenting years of emotional abandonment. Neighbors testifying that your 12-year-old was begging for food while you stored $1,000 bottles of wine in your cellar. She looked up, and the weight of her gaze made both defendants flinch. I've been a family court judge for 23 years. I've seen poverty, addiction, mental illness, parents who desperately want to do better but lack resources or support. That's not what I see here. I see two people who viewed their children as accessories to their lifestyle, who prioritized social status over basic parenting, and who, when confronted with the consequences of their actions, chose defamation and manipulation over accountability. Judge Morrison picked up her gavel. Nathan and Rebecca Brown, you are hereby sentenced to 7 years in state prison for reckless endangerment of a child with intent to cause harm. Additionally, your parental rights to Robert Michael Brown and Evelyn Grace Brown are permanently and irrevocably terminated, effective immediately. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom. Rebecca's sob was audible. Nathan's face went white. Furthermore, the judge continued, the Brown estate will be liquidated. After legal fees and restitution, the remaining assets will be placed in an educational trust for the minor children, administered by their legal guardian, Dorothy Jacobs, until they reach age 25. She looked directly at me. Ms. Jacobs, you're being granted full legal custody. These children are yours now, in every way that matters. I trust you'll continue to provide them the care and stability they deserve. I stood, my legs barely supporting me. Yes, Your Honor. I will. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell again, and it was over. Attorney Brennan hugged me in the hallway, her professional composure finally breaking. You did it. You won. But as I walked out of the courthouse into the cold February air, I realized winning wasn't the right word. I'd been given two children who needed everything: safety, love, healing, time. And I'd been given the chance to become the parent they deserved. That wasn't winning. That was responsibility. That was purpose. That was everything. 2 years later, I woke to the sound of laughter filtering through my bedroom door, real laughter, the kind that came from children who felt safe enough to be loud, silly, unguarded. I lay still for a moment, listening to Robert's voice and Evelyn's giggles as they moved around the kitchen, and felt the familiar swell of gratitude that still caught me off guard even after all this time. The house was nothing like the Brown estate. It was a modest 3-bedroom ranch on a quiet street, with a small yard that flooded every spring and a fence that needed painting. But it had room for a garden, space for Robert's telescope, and a kitchen table big enough for homework and art projects and the chaotic family dinners we'd learned to navigate together. I'd bought it outright with part of the settlement money, refusing to take on debt, refusing to build our new life on anything that could be taken away. The rest sat in the educational trust, waiting for college applications and futures I was determined they'd have. I pulled on my robe and padded down the hallway, pausing at the photos lining the walls, pictures that hadn't existed 2 years ago. Robert at his 8th grade graduation, grinning despite his awkward attempts at looking cool. Evelyn on her first day of 4th grade, wearing the backpack she'd picked out herself. The 3 of us at the beach last summer, sandy and sunburned and genuinely happy. In the kitchen, Robert stood at the stove making pancakes while Evelyn set the table with exaggerated care, her tongue poking out in concentration. She'd grown taller, her face losing some of its baby roundness. Robert had shot up 6 inches and his voice had dropped, though he still had moments where it cracked unexpectedly, making him blush. "Morning," I said, and they both turned. "We made breakfast," Evelyn announced proudly. "It's a special day." My chest tightened. January 13th. The anniversary of the night that had changed everything. We'd talked about whether to acknowledge it, whether marking the date would be healthy or harmful. Dr. Chen, their therapist, had suggested letting the children lead, letting them decide how, or if, they wanted to remember. "We decided we want to celebrate," Robert said, flipping a pancake with surprising competence. He'd taken to cooking over the past year, finding something therapeutic in the precision and care it required. Not what happened, but what came after. The fact that we're here. That we're okay. Evelyn nodded seriously. Dr. Chen says we get to rewrite our story. So today isn't scary anymore. It's the day we came home. I had to turn away, pretending to check the coffee pot while I blinked back tears. They'd both come so far. The first year had been hard, nightmares, anxiety, Robert's anger that would erupt over small things, Evelyn's fear of being alone even for a moment. There had been therapy appointments twice a week, school counselors, patient teachers who understood that trauma didn't follow a timeline. But slowly, steadily, they'd begun to heal. Robert had joined the astronomy club at school and made friends who came over to stargaze in our backyard. Evelyn had discovered a love of art, and our refrigerator was covered in her drawings, bright, hopeful images of families and flowers and houses with windows full of light. We ate breakfast together at the table, Robert's pancakes only slightly burned, and talked about normal things. Robert's upcoming science fair project. Evelyn's request for a pet hamster. The movie we'd planned to watch that evening. After Robert left to meet friends at the library and Evelyn settled in the living room with her art supplies, she called me over. "I made something for you," she said shyly, holding out a folded piece of construction paper covered in glitter and stickers. I opened it carefully. Inside, in Evelyn's careful handwriting surrounded by hearts and stars, was a single word, Mom. Below it, she'd written, "Thank you for saving us. Thank you for keeping us. Thank you for being our mom. Love, Evelyn." My vision blurred. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight while she giggled and complained about being squished. "I love you," I whispered into her hair. "I love you too, Mom." Mom. Not Aunt Dorothy. Just Mom. Robert had started calling me that about 6 months ago, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Evelyn had held out longer, still processing what family meant, what mothers were supposed to be. But she'd gotten there in her own time, and hearing it never stopped feeling like a gift. That evening, after the movie and popcorn and Evelyn's insistence on staying up past her bedtime, I stood at the front door, locking up for the night. My hand touched the simple deadbolt, and I thought about the smart lock that had nearly killed them, the technology weaponized into cruelty. When we'd moved into this house, I'd specifically requested old-fashioned locks, keys, deadbolts, nothing that could be controlled remotely or changed with a code. The locksmith had given me 3 copies of each key. One stayed in the kitchen drawer. One lived in my purse. The third hung on a simple silver chain around my neck, tucked under my shirt where I could feel its weight against my heart. Robert had noticed it months ago. "You don't have to wear that," he'd said quietly. "We're safe now." "I know," I'd told him. "But it reminds me what home means. Access. Safety. The knowledge that you can always get inside." He'd understood. He always understood. Now, standing in the quiet house with my children asleep in their rooms, I touched the key through my shirt and thought about all the ways life could break and remake you. About the moment you stop surviving and start living. About how family wasn't always the people who shared your blood, but the people who showed up at 4 a.m. in the snow and never let go. I'd lost my savings, my peace, my simple life. I'd gained 2 children who called me Mom. Who laughed at breakfast and made art and asked for hamsters. Who were learning, slowly but surely, what it meant to be loved without conditions. The house settled around me, creaking in the way old houses do. Outside, snow was starting to fall, soft, gentle flakes that looked nothing like that terrible blizzard 2 years ago. I checked the locks one more time, turned off the lights, and headed to my bedroom. Behind me, my children slept in rooms filled with books and toys they actually played with, in beds with warm blankets, in a home where doors opened instead of locked them out. We were safe. We were home. And that was everything.